Can you please ensure that your mobile phones are switched to silent? And councillors, you may have noticed that we have new state-of-the-art webcasting equipment in the chamber, so state-of-the-art that it can't actually follow us on the camera, so we're going to get the group shot up there all the time. Can you please make sure that your cards are pushed into the slot at the back of the unit? And as ever, please ensure that you speak directly into the microphone. So we move to the main items of business, and the first item is to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on 9th of August 2017, which have been on the table for 30 minutes. Are you happy for me to sign those? Agree. Thank you. Amy, have we any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies from Councillor Jeanette Stennett, Councillor Stuart Stennett and Councillor Liz Townsend.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest?
None before the meeting, Chairman.
Okay. Have any members got any declarations they would like to? Oh, I've got two hands up. Councillor Foraszewski.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. And my apologies for not doing this sooner, but I wasn't quite sure whether I should or not, but on balance, I think I should. I would like to declare a prejudicial interest, and I will be leaving the room when it comes to the last item, which is land to the rear of Little Park Hatch. Some time ago, I accepted payment for services in terms of training through a business that I run, and as a member of the parish council at the time, I took an interest to step away from this application when it was read before. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Chairman. With reference to agenda item 6.3, land at rear of Orchard Cottages, Bramley, I just need to declare that I participated in the Bramley Parish Council planning meeting that submitted a statement of no objection to this item.
Thank you. Amy, have any questions been received from members of the public?
Thank you, Chairman. None received.
Jolly good. Peter, are there any updates to government guidance or legislation?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I do have an update this evening. It's a general update following receipt of updated national planning practice guidance, but I'd also ask that this is taken as a verbal update to items B1 to B3 on the agenda. It relates specifically to financial considerations and how they should be considered in the determination of application. You will see that often officers will refer to these where relevant, and usually when there's a net gain of new dwellings, and we refer to what the figure would be from the new homes bonus. So hopefully members are sort of comfortable with seeing that in agendas when we've got new dwellings coming forward. So just as a background, section 70 of the Town and Country Planning Act states that any local financial considerations are a matter to which local planning authorities must have regard to in determining planning applications as far as they are material to the application. So local financial considerations are defined as grants from government or sums payable to authority under the community infrastructure levy. This means that something like the new homes bonus is capable of being a material planning consideration where relevant. Previously, we used to say to you that a financial consideration in the form of the new homes bonus was a matter that weighed in favour of the development, and it was a clear guidance from government in favour of bringing forward housing. It was as blatant as that in terms of their approach to it. What the new planning practice guidance states is that whether or not a local financial consideration is material to a decision will depend on whether it could help to make the development acceptable in planning terms. So it's not appropriate for a decision to be made on the basis that development could have a potential to raise money for the local authority or other government body alone. It must relate to the development. So there's quite a clear change in terms of that advice. My understanding is that the council does not rely on the new homes bonus, local financial considerations such as this to mitigate against the specific effects of development. And based on this up-to-date advice, it should not now form a material planning consideration. If, of course, this was to change into the future or a decision were taken with regards to monies from a specific development in the form of new homes bonus to mitigate an impact, the appropriate advice would, of course, be put to the committee in that circumstance. But you'll see that sort of paragraph and that advice changing in your reports from here on in. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions for Peter on that item? No. Okay, so just to... Sorry, Councillor Band.
I just think it's very appropriate, seeing the fact that new homes bonus, the actual amount the council receives is somewhat subject to government's arbitrary decisions, and I think it's entirely appropriate. We shouldn't be considering it as a significant planning issue.
Hear, hear. Just a point of information, in the event of site inspections being required as a result of considerations of the applications at the meeting, these will be held on Monday the 2nd of October at a time to be agreed. So we'll move on to the main items for consideration this evening. The first is item B1, which is reference WA 2017-0893, and it's the erection of a detached dwelling and garage with associated works, including the vehicular access as amended by various things and tree protection plan at Green Hedges, the Ridgeway, Cranley. Rebecca, would you like to introduce this application?
Thank you, Chairman. This is located on the northern side of the Ridgeway within the developed area of Cranley. The site comprises a two-storey detached dwelling with a deep rear garden. The top left photograph shows the area within the existing garden of Green Hedges where the dwelling would be located. The top right photo is taken looking back at the host dwelling, Green Hedges. The bottom left photo is taken of the western boundary with houses in Grange Park beyond. And then the bottom right photo is taken of the eastern boundary with the houses in Loretto Close beyond. With regards to the access, the top left photograph shows the existing access point which would serve the dwelling, and the top right photo is taken within the site looking at the area where the access track would be located, so between the two dwellings. Permission is sought for the erection of a detached dwelling with attached single garage. The dwelling would be accessed via the existing access point of the Ridgeway, which members will have just seen in the photograph. This access would be a separate access to that serving the host dwelling. The proposed dwelling would be a chalet bungalow. It would have a ridge height of 7 metres and would feature a pitched roof with a chimney, front and rear projections, a dormer window and roof lights. The dwelling would benefit from 3 bedrooms. The master bedroom with ensuite would be located within the roof space. Full details of proposed materials and boundary treatment could be secured by means of a condition. The current application follows a previous application for the erection of a detached dwelling that was granted under delegated powers in February of this year. This represents an extant scheme which could be lawfully implemented on site. A comparison of the block plans can be seen on screen. The main differences are that the current proposal on the right-hand side would include an attached garage as opposed to a detached garage. The siting of the current proposed dwelling has been moved slightly back within the site and slightly to the east. And the current proposal also includes habitable accommodation within the roof space. There is an error in the officer report, which I apologise for. On page 15 of the agenda report, it is stated that the footprint would be the same for both schemes. The current scheme is actually 15 square metres greater than that previously approved. Notwithstanding the error in the report, it is considered that the current scheme would not result in any material additional harm over and above the extant scheme. The principle of the erection of a dwelling in the location has been established, and officers are satisfied that there would be no additional harm to neighbouring or visual amenity. If I could turn members' attention to the update sheet, we have now received comments from the Council's Environmental Health Officer. Officers are satisfied, however, that appropriate conditions in connection with the comments that we have received have already been recommended. The recommendation is therefore as set out on the agenda report, that subject to conditions and informatives as set out in the agenda report, permission should be granted. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Rebecca. Members, comments, please. Councillor Ellis.
Try this out. Thank you, Chairman. As a member of representing the Cranley area, Cranley has in the past had an objection based on the type of area in which we live to backland development. And I have to say that in this case, I think it's a pretty obvious case of backland development, somebody wishing to take advantage of the fact that they have a large garden. However, I have to accept that the previous application has established the principle of development on this particular site. So I do feel that the backland development here would impact adversely on neighbours in the surrounding area. And I think this is going to open a whole can of worms, as it were, with other similar requests for permission in this particular area. I'm not sure that because the principle has been established, that I can object on the grounds of backland development, and that it's more or less in a similar size to the permission granted. But I would appreciate hearing from comments from my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wojciechowski.
Thank you, Chairman. I find this regrettable because, like Councillor Ellis has just said, it is clearly backland development, and I believe it's an overdevelopment of the site. But in principle, as already said, you know, the development has been established. So you've got extant permission that was done and delegated powers some months ago. And I find we're between a rock and a hard place. I actually quite like what is before us this evening. And I find it difficult to refuse on the basis of permissions already being granted. The site's got quite a long history of, you know, a relevant planning history already. Regrettable. I can't find a reason for going back to the drawing board on this one. I just hope that the parish council's comments are taken on board, and I'm sure they will be, and that some of the reasons in the report where they've asked for improvements in the conditions are adhered to. But as I say, regrettably, I can't find any reason on planning grounds why I can not support the officer's recommendation, purely on the basis that permission has already been established and granted. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Any other comments before we... Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Chairman. I did go on the site visit, and it was very useful to go on the site visit. I do share the councillor's concerns. It's a very tight access to get on site there, and the fact that they're going to have a fire hydrant on site doesn't bode well. Yeah, so I do share the concerns, emergency services, and I think that's very much in our minds at the moment with what's been happening at Grenfell. So I have got reservations about this, and of course there has been set a precedent on this matter, but I think it's important that I express my concerns about one or two things that I think are short of the package, as it were. The entrance, the emergency services, and the fact that whatever deliveries come to the house will have to be delivered at the curbside. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Byam.
Well, I understand the concerns that are being expressed about backland development. I happen to have close friends who live in Headley Down who have a similar site and actually quite a bit tighter, and they've had exactly this, that they live in a bungalow in exactly this situation with much smaller amount of ground and probably a larger property, and they find they're quite happy with it. But notwithstanding that, I do understand it. I think it's a lesson to us all as councillors this was done under delegated powers. We've got to be mindful and watchful about what's coming forward and decide whether we want to call it in for decision by the committee in the first place, which this clearly wasn't, and therefore, as you said, they've got they've got existing permissions, and the changes are not substantial enough to even consider it to be not worthy.
Thank you. Councillor Denis.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at the the diagram, I wonder what the distance is from the proposed road to the property on the right-hand side, because looking on page 6 of our papers, it would appear to be extremely close to that boundary line. I just wondered whether we had a distance between the actual edge of the road and that property. I can't read what the name of the house is on the right. And also at the current proposal where the garage is based, again, the distance between that and the property. But I'm more concerned about the one as you come off the main road. It seems to be incredibly close as a vehicle access. And I just wondered if we had how many metres it was. See, Peter has got his ruler, so I'm sure I will get an answer.
Rebecca, Peter, would you like to? Oh.
Thank you, Chairman. It appears to be around 3 metres.
Chair, thank you for getting your ruler and giving me a measurement. I share all my colleagues' views. When I saw this and read this, I thought, where is this original permission? And I was absolutely astounded. But we are where we are, and I'm really disappointed for those local residents who I think now have to live with a flawed previous decision that should have been called in. So, very regrettably, I think our hands are tied. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Dean. Rebecca, are you sure that you with that 3 metres, because there's a scale bar at the bottom of the report plan, and next door there's the drive is shown as 3.7, and looking at that scale bar, I make it more like 6 or 7 metres from the edge of the new drive to the side of the house we're talking, yes?
Chairman, if the plan on screen is the one we took it from on the location plan, actually, because it showed the position of that property that's been constructed.
Oh, sorry, I do apologise. I thought Councillor Denis was asking the distance between the driveway and the host house, Green Hedges.
No, to confirm, it's where that road will go along the right-hand side. The boundaries of that house to the right-hand side is extremely close.
Right.
So okay. I wondered, so roughly where your pointer is there, what is the distance between where the edge of the road to where that property, because it's on that, it's virtually touching. So it doesn't appear to be 3 or 10 feet from the edge to the first point of the house.
Chairman, if it's helpful, that's the measurement I took, and it's a 1 to 1250 plan that we've taken that from, so obviously looks small.
Thank you, Peter. Chairman. Shall we move to the recommendation? The recommendation is that subject to conditions 1 to 18 and informatives 1 to 10, permission be granted. All those in favour? Against?
None.
Abstention? 1. So that recommendation is granted. So we move on to item B2, which is reference WA 2017-1169, and the proposal is for outline application for the erection of 6 dwellings together with vehicular access, car and cycle parking, all matters reserved except the access at land to the rear of Orchard Cottages, Park Drive, Bramley. And once again, Rebecca is going to present this. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Chairman. Members may recall that an outline application for the erection of 5 dwellings at this site was brought before the committee in March of this year with an officer recommendation for refusal. Members concluded that very special circumstances existed and resolved to grant permission. A legal agreement was then subsequently completed and outline permission was granted in June 2016. But to briefly remind members of the application site, it is located on the northern side of Park Drive in Bramley, and it comprises an open parcel of land with existing access to the east of Park Drive. The site itself lies within the Greenbelt. The northern part of the site falls within the rural settlement area, and the southern part falls outside of the settlement boundary. There's just a few photographs on screen then, just to outline the application site. So for the current proposal, outline permission is sought for the erection of 6 dwellings, with all matters reserved except for access. An indicative layout plan has, however, been submitted, which members can see on the screen. Of the 6 dwellings proposed, 2 would be affordable and 4 would be market. The illustrative plan shows that parking could be provided within the site to serve the dwellings. A total of 14 spaces is shown. No information has been provided with regards to the indicative height or design of the proposed dwellings, but that would be subject to outstanding reserve matters. So the slide on the screen shows a comparison of the current proposal on the right-hand side with the extant scheme on the left. The illustrative layout for the previous scheme included the provision of a 4-bed property, the larger one there. The applicant has confirmed that this is no longer required. It was previously proposed to be used by the rectory. So therefore the current scheme has taken this on board, and it would include a mixture of 2-bed, which would be the 2 semi-detached, and then 3-bed, which would be the remaining dwellings. Having regard to the differences between the 2 schemes, officers consider that there would be no material additional harm over and above the previously approved scheme, and the same very special circumstances would be applicable. So the recommendation is therefore subject to the completion of a Section 106 agreement and conditions that permission be granted. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Rebecca. Members. Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Chairman. So as one of the local members, I'm supportive of this application. The applicant already has an approved design for the site, and all the issues around development of land in the Greenbelt were aired when we approved the earlier application. The revised design does not change that position, in my view. What has changed since the original application, as Rebecca stated, is that the Guildford Diocese has withdrawn its interest in using the proposed 4-bedroom property as a new vicarage, and the applicant's asking to replace the larger 4-bedroomed house with 2 3-bedroomed houses. Since the previous application, Bramley Parish has conducted a housing needs survey, the results of which indicate a demand for smaller properties. So this change partly addresses that finding. And we've also seen changes in the forward expectations for housing in Bramley from the examination of the local plan. So, currently we're expecting an increase from 70 new houses to 90 new properties being proposed. So this would provide 1 additional property towards that requirement, and therefore is potentially beneficial. So totally supportive of the main detail. One issue I would like to raise relates to condition 14. When we discussed the previous application, I raised the question of ongoing maintenance of the access road, which will be repaired and resurfaced under the condition initially. But when the initial application was made, the applicant indicated in a letter in January to Bramley Parish Council that he would be prepared to establish a managed fund for periodic maintenance of this unadopted access road. So given this offer has been made in writing, I would like to see the requirement incorporated into any approval of the application so that we actually have a sustainable access solution for the future. One other road issue has arisen since the original application. The detailed planning application for land at Ricardo Court, which involves 24 new properties to the southeast of this site, has been submitted. The Ricardo Court application requires the main pedestrian access to the village centre to use the east end of Park Drive. Residents of Park Drive and Bramley Park Court, close to this site, are concerned that residents, tradesmen and visitors to the new Ricardo Court development may use Park Drive as overspill parking. So I'd welcome an informative being included, requesting the emplacement of residents-only parking signs at the start of the unadopted part of Park Drive, because I know that would have local support. Beyond that, I'm supportive of it from a Bramley perspective. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Officers, would you like to respond?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Seaborn. We were just sort of just briefly going through the sort of the managed fund, that sort of approach. I mean, given the scale of the development, we wouldn't usually look to secure a management fund, but the way you would do it is suggesting an additional obligation within a legal agreement which needs to be signed up to. It is obviously a private road, so it's not public maintainable road, so that's where the issues are arising. So it would be for members to decide whether it is proportionate to require a development of this scale to have a specific management company required as part of the obligation. I know there's a commitment there, and we could look to provide an informative for the relevant users of the road to enter into residents association, that sort of group for the maintenance. So it's really for members to decide whether they think it is proportionate for a legal agreement to require it of this development. We haven't sought it, but it's something that I'd put to members to take a view on. Sorry, there's the additional point as well regarding the additional work outside, effectively what we think is outside the red edge boundary, sort of signage, footpath, those sort of things. And I think that's something that we need to, or would be better addressed with an informative to the applicant to go and work with the relevant users of that access if they're looking to bring it forward anyway. That will hope to be achieved on that basis, but we haven't got a sort of a highway safety sort of angle to support that and justify that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Peter. Would you wish to come back, Councillor Seymour?
Yes, very, very briefly. I mean, I think all I was suggesting on the second item was an informative. I have discussed this with Rebecca beforehand, and we can't be too heavy-handed about this, but I know it would be a very popular outcome, and the applicant has demonstrated lots of willingness to work with the community. On the first point, I just point out to colleagues that as part of the discussions leading to the parish council offering no objection, the letter offering an ongoing maintenance scheme was provided to the parish council, so that has been actually put up front, and part of the parish council's lack of objection is based on that offer by the applicant. Thank you.
Councillor Byam.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just slightly confused on the red line area, which on the screen, of course, we've got the permitted scheme and the replacement scheme. On the earlier one, we have a red line which covers the road, and clearly that's, well, at least I presume, is part of the application, and therefore it does cover it in a slightly different way. And to say that the applicant and owner of the land has, as Councillor Seymour said, has made it clear that they're happy to upgrade the road and to maintain it. But how we do that and how we go forward, I must admit, I think overall we ought to be accepting that we have a system, and if we can in some way put in something that suggests maintenance, that would be good, but I don't think that should scupper the scheme. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Denis.
I'll be brief. It's good to see the support from the local councillor, which is very good. Just the one point about the condition about the road and to make sure that it's sustainable. I think we've had the offer, and I would like to see that personally. I'm not saying it would scupper our support, but I think we have a responsibility to the local residents. The offer's been made. It was part of the parish's consideration. So personally, I would definitely support that being as a condition. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we need to put that as an amendment, or is that something that you can include as an extra condition?
Thank you, Chairman. I'd suggest it would be included in the recommendation.
Expand condition 14. Yes.
No, I think if I could just sort of provide some advice. We were just talking. It needs to go into the legal agreement because it's a financial requirement on them, and that legal agreement will set out who's going to basically pay. Is it going to be a developer contribution up front, or is it going to be ongoing payments from future residents? So we will put that clause into the legal agreement, I think, to give that option to come forward with a management structure that we then agree as a council. And I think that covers it off. So I'd suggest that we would update the recommendation to say within 6 months, currently recommendation A is that subject to completion of Section 106 agreement within 6 months to secure the provision of affordable housing and provision of a management company for the existing access into the site. So the recommendation members will be considering would include that. We would then take that away and draw up the legal agreement with colleagues in legal. And we'll also add an informative asking the applicants to work with the users of the lane and the parish council, if necessary, to agree those additional points as well. And if you're happy, we'll put some wording together and share with the chairman. Yep. Thank you.
Any other members like to comment before we move to the recommendation? Right, so we have two recommendations. Recommendation A is that subject to the completion of a Section 106 agreement within 6 months to secure the provision of affordable housing and the provision of a management company as just described, and conditions 1 to 15 and informatives 1 to 13, permission be granted. All those in favour?
That's 9, Chairman.
Against?
1.
Abstentions? Okay, that is then granted. Then there's recommendation B that in the event of a Section 106 agreement not being completed within 6 months of the date of the resolution to grant outline permission, then permission be refused. All those in favour?
That's unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you. So that's carried as well. So we move on to item B3, which is reference WA 2017-0758. And the proposal is the erection of an extension to existing dwelling to provide 2 additional dwellings as amended by plans received on the 8th of June 2017 and ecology information received on the 7th of August 2017 at Allfold Farm Bungalow, Loxwood Road, Allfold. And once again, Rebecca, it's your privilege to present this application.
Thank you, Chairman. All right, the site is located on the eastern side of Loxwood Road and comprises a detached bungalow. Access to is provided rather to the south of the site via a shared road, which also is a bridleway. In addition to the application site, this access also serves Allfold Business Centre, Allfold Farm, and a small number of residential properties. There's a private entrance to the south, to the south of the site, which I'm just pointing out on screen there. Allfold Farm, the neighbouring building, was granted permission on appeal recently for the conversion into residential dwellings. The site lies within the countryside beyond the green belts and is adjacent to the conservation area, and I've highlighted the conservation area boundary in blue on the plan. So the existing bungalow can be seen in the top left photograph. Access to the site, which is adjacent to Allfold Farm, can be seen in the photograph below, bottom left. The neighbouring residential properties comprising 1 to 4 Black Barn are seen in the top right photograph, and then the bottom right photograph shows the mixture of commercial and residential units in the Allfold Business Centre. As advised, the existing building currently comprises a detached bungalow. However, a certificate of lawfulness has been granted for the erection of an extension to the bungalow. The approved extension is shown in blue on the plan, and this could be lawfully built out. The floor plan on the screen shows what could be lawfully built out, so that's what's been approved under the certificate of lawfulness. So it's got the existing bungalow, if I point that out, on the left, and then this section here is the extension. So turning to the proposed block plan, permission is currently sought for the erection of extensions to the existing dwelling to provide for 2 additional dwellings, so there will be 3 in total. The existing building would be part demolished as a result of this. The proposed building would be single-storey in height and would provide for 3 2-bed properties. Parking spaces, as members will see, will be provided to the south of the building, and there would be 2 spaces for each of the dwellings. The external front and rear appearances would be the same for each residential unit. The building would feature a pitched roof with front and rear gable projections. Glazing would be used to add interest to the elevations. There would be no openings on the eastern elevation, which is in the bottom right. This would be adjacent to the land serving Allfold Farm, the neighbouring building. The proposed floor plans would be the same for each residential unit. Each would feature an open plan kitchen dining area to the rear, 2 bedrooms, a utility room and a bathroom. Planning permission has previously been refused on site for the erection of 5 dwellings. The dwellings proposed under the refused scheme would have been 2-storey in height, and they would be split across 2 areas of built form, one to the north and then one to the south. The application was refused under delegated powers for 4 reasons. The reasons related to the number of buildings, their size, height, bulk, proximity to the neighbouring buildings, and overall urbanising impacts. Also, insufficient information was submitted in relation to ecology and drainage. The current proposal would result in fewer dwellings on the site, and the built form of the dwellings would largely be contained within the same footprint as what could lawfully be built out on site. The dwellings would now be 1-storey in height and would be no closer to existing neighbouring dwellings than the existing dwelling. Having regard to the number of units, there's no requirement for a SUDS drainage system to be provided, and subject to conditions, no objection is raised by officers on the grounds of ecology. Officers are satisfied that the current scheme has overcome the previous reasons for refusal. The proposed dwellings are considered to be of an acceptable size, height and scale, which would not detract from the overall character and appearance of the countryside beyond the greenbelt. There would be no harm to neighbouring amenity, and sufficient parking would be provided. As such, officers recommend that, subject to conditions, permission be granted. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Rebecca. Members, Councillor Denis.
Thank you, Chair. And as this is my area, I know it very well. And this is in the old part of Alfold, down by the pond. And the application, as has been detailed, is about a detached bungalow which will end up as 3 properties. The overall size is slightly bigger, but it's actually the fact you've got 2 extra families, 2 extra loads of cars. So it's a bit like having a big country house and turn it into 30 flats. It might be the same size, footprint, but it's still a big impact on the area. I'm at least pleased that the application is reduced from 5 to 3 this time round, and the 5 were, as you know, refused. I do think this is out of character for the area. I mean, if you put up the picture of the front of what they look like, I mean, it's like a seaside home to me, not homes that sit in historical part of a village. So the actual design, unfortunately, doesn't impress me a great deal. If you look at the parish's comments, and I always do look at the comments, they really have said what I have. You know, they're pleased to see it's reduced, but they still feel 3 units of this size and density would create an urbanising effect, and I agree. I think it's a real shame that the application wasn't for 2, because I think that would have at least not created such an urbanising effect in a very, very quiet part of the village. I am really concerned, and then the parish have said it, about the how they're going to deal with foul and surface water. If you look at the parish's comments, already the surface water from that area directly flows into ditches without consent of the ditch owner. Now, I know that's being looked at and how they're going to try and resolve that, but I always find that when you have applications in front of you from an area that has suffered from flooding of sewage, and we have absolutely no idea how the sewage is going to be dealt with. The one thing which I'm a little bit surprised, that we've obviously sought the views of Thames Water and got their normal no objection, but of course the sewage doesn't go to Cranley, so the Cranley members will be really pleased. It flows down into Sussex, so it goes into Southern Waters, and we haven't sought their views. Now, from my memory, there is a legal limit of how much sewage can be pumped from Thames Water into Southern Water, and when that gets to its limit, you can't pump any more. Now, some of the houses on the Surrey-Sussex border in the past and currently still suffer from sewage coming through their premises. It's been mentioned about the conservation area, how close it is. Well, actually part of the drive goes through it. So it is right on top of the conservation area. And we seem to be almost saying, oh, it doesn't really matter, we can put 3 properties. Well, I remember the amount of time and effort that went in to decide the conservation area and the site visit and reading all the documents. So I'm not really sure what the point of a conservation area if we actually don't try and use that, you know, to help us in these decisions. When you look at the reasons for the previous refusal, first one was the urbanising effect on the countryside and failing to take opportunities available to improve the quality and character of the area. When I look at this application, so what we've got is a bungalow with a permission, which that's questionable why we had that permission, which we now turn into 3 properties. And I really can't see in the documentation how this enhances the intrinsic beauty of the countryside and how does it improve the quality and character of the area. I can't see that at all personally. Reason 2 was about the height, the size and his impact on neighbours. And I think other than going from 1 property to 3, I think in the main that has been met by the design being a bungalow and not having the window. I think that has been met. Reason 3 was about the drainage strategy for the refusal. Well, the condition gives me no comfort. I've said this many a times because I get the phone calls from people when they've got sewage coming into their house. It gives me absolutely no confidence at all. And I just think it's a real shame that members for all applications don't have the drainage strategy in front of us so we can actually consider that when making our decisions. You know, because we have to be 100% satisfied that we're not the instigators of misery to the neighbours. Page 99, I just want to just turn to that. So page 99 mentions the appeal. Now I believe it's talking about the appeal on the opposite side of the road. But I think that's a very, very different application to this one. If you look at that other site, which it sort of says it's similar, it has a house which is set probably 200 foot from the road with a large section of land. You can see the land actually virtually opposite that piece of green. Now, that site there, so what you can see in front of you, has been subject to 2 inspectors' appeals which have been refused. Now, if you look at that piece of land and the house which will be knocked down, is been bought by Surrey County Council, and this is to develop a residential setting for adults with particular needs. So I think it's a very, very different position of that house. The piece of land that you can see on the left-hand side opposite the driveway into the site has had several applications. I think it's varied from 20 houses to 30 houses, which have been refused. But at least with those applications, there is substantial money that would have come with the developments that could have helped develop the sustainability of the village. The current one of adding another couple of houses brings nothing to us. But the other site would have brought us. I think the 2 sites are very, very different, and to try and refer them to papers as similar, I think is a little bit misleading personally. The inspector in both of those appeals said Allfold has limited public services. I think we know that. Again, the dwellings bring nothing to the village except for extra cars. And we will have to be car related because public transport is very limited. Now, page 103, the officers rightly have said that the design will be more modern than the recent developments. Why are we allowing a modern development style, you know, the words of the officers, in a small development that has had a lot of work done to it to make it fit into the Allfold village style? And I just think the style alone is just awful and does not fit in. So even if it was felt that 3 dwellings were suitable, adequate and sustainable, the design, I think, is awful. And you know, the people who have had to do that, you know, on the previous applications, well, is there one rule for them and this is a slightly different rule? You know, if we say that's a design that we expect, then people should actually do that. Surrey highways, they're normal, no objections. 75 yards from that entrance is where the fatal accident occurred last year. I say no more on that. Members may see that there has been no letters of objection. I think there are good reasons for that, which I know in confidence. It does not surprise me that people haven't felt able to come forward and raise their concerns. And I'll say no more in this setting, but in case members wondered why there wasn't any letters of objection. And my final note was on the page 117. So, I mean, it says on the response to the parish that the comments are noted and carefully considered. I'm not sure they have been, because the parish only made a couple of observations about 3 is potentially too many. 2 would have been more of an appropriate level. So they haven't really taken them into account, or certainly haven't considered them in the final decision. I think if this had a better design, so not a modern design, but a design that fitted in with all the other applications that have gone in that area, which matches the location, and a design with 2 houses, and a bit more knowledge about how they're going to deal with the sewage and water, I probably would have been supporting it tonight. But yet again, we get an application that just doesn't convince me 100% that this is right. But I'd be really interested to hear my colleagues and thank them for my indulgence for speaking for so long. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter, you'd like to respond?
So, thank you, Chairman. I won't pick up on all the points. I just wanted to make just one point of clarification, because reference was made to the appeal decision, and I just wanted to make clear which one we were actually referring to, because it wasn't the one by on the other side of the road. We were actually referring to the appeal decision relating to the conversion of the barn. So that's what those comments are taking. If on the screen Rebecca's indicating we're referring to that appeal decision that's most recently related to the adjacent building, not the adjacent land. Just for clarification, that's what that quote's come from, and not the other site where it was supported at appeal on 2 occasions where there was the heritage harm. So hopefully it was just to clarify. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Sorry? Councillor Band.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I acknowledge the concerns expressed by Councillor Denis and the local people through the parish council. But I do have some difficulty in planning terms looking at the size of the enlarged bungalow through the certificate of lawfulness as to how we can really sustain an objection to this. I think the only issue of real outstanding concern to me in planning terms is the design, which I accept seems to be out of keeping with the traditional village nature, which I think is unfortunate. But nonetheless, I think, I'm interested to hear what others say, but I think because of the size of the enlarged bungalow, it's going to be extremely difficult to sustain an objection in planning terms, notwithstanding the natural and real concerns I acknowledge of the parish council. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you to my colleague here sitting next to me for his comments on this application. I would totally agree. I'm sorry, I do find the design totally out of keeping for the area. And I believe actually that I've been on a site visit to this site quite some time ago. And I do think that the application before us is totally out of keeping, inappropriate, and quite frankly, awful. I share the concerns regarding the sewerage and water, and I think I personally don't feel that I could agree to this application application without further information on how that particular aspect associated with the application is going to be dealt with. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Goodridge.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, on the one hand, we want this to be a bungalow rather than two-storey, and if you're going to be a bungalow, it does put limits on design of a building. And if one looks on page 85 as to the elevations that were intended for the extant development, which has been granted as a certificate of lawfulness, that ain't particularly beautiful either. I mean, I think the problem is that the proposed elevations, as seen on the bottom of page 85, is full of shadows and nasty bits added, and if only architects could actually draw it as it's going to look, rather than with the sun shining from right to left, it would be easier to understand what the elevations are going to look like. But I've heard, you know, what the local member has had to say, but I rather share Councillor Band's view that from a planning point of view, I find it very difficult to be able to find good reasons, sustainable reasons, if you like, as to why this should be refused. I mean, clearly from the sewage and drainage point of view and water, I mean, that is going to be covered by a condition. And I can't really see, I think we'd be in difficulty if we deferred it or refused it, wanting these particulars to be before us before we could decide. If we've got a strong condition in that nothing will be built or they won't start the development until a satisfactory scheme has been approved by the local authority, and by all means involving the local member so that the local member can have an input, possibly, you know, when the proposed scheme is put in, so that he can critically appraise it.
Thank you. Okay, right, members, so we'll move to the recommendation, which is that subject to conditions 1 to 14 and informatives 1 to 9, permission be granted. All those in favour?
Sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, Chairman.
Against?
That's 2, Chairman.
And abstentions?
1, Chairman.
Okay, that permission is granted then. So moving on to item B4, reference WA 2017-0858. And the proposal is the erection of 6 dwellings with access road, including alterations to public house parking, as amended by plans received on the 23rd of June 2017, at land to the rear of Little Park Hatch, Brookhurst Road, Cranley. And Chris is going to present this application. Chris.
Thank you, Chairman. There's one update within the update sheet, which is a suggested amendment to condition 3. The amendment is to ensure that details of all walls and gates are agreed prior to commencement of development. I'll run through the details of the application. That's the only update. This is the location plan and aerial photograph of the site. The application site is the site outlined in red on the right-hand side there. The Brockhurst Road runs across the north of the site, and the Grade 2 listed public house, which is Little Park Hatch, is within the blue line fronting the road. The application site was formerly used as garden serving the public house. Yew Tree Cottage is located to the east of the application site and benefits from planning permission for 2 dwellings. The land to the south down here is part of the Parkmead Primary School, and the boundary with Haley Place, which is along here, along the west, is heavily treed, with the trees largely outside of the application boundary. This is the proposed site plan. A new access is proposed here to be created and run down the side of the Little Park Hatch, and you can see the site narrows to the south here. The application proposes 6 dwellings in the form of 4 semi-detached and 2 detached properties, with access running from the highway down to the rear of the site. The public house would retain a suitable garden area to the rear, and 26 parking spaces would be retained for the public house. A separation of approximately 3.5 metres would be retained between the plot 1 and the closest point of the boundary with the garden of the public house. And a separation of approximately 40 centimetres is proposed where plot 6 is positioned in relation to the rear boundary. This is the proposed layout on the left-hand side here, and the layout which was subject to the recently dismissed appeal is on the right-hand side. So you can see the differences between the two. Notably, the alignment of the access has been adjusted to allow for some landscaping, and also a reduction in the formalised linear appearance, which was part of the previously dismissed appeal. The parallel parking spaces, which are here, which would have served the public house, have been increased in length under the current proposal, and there have been changes to the position of the dwellings in relation to the adjoining boundary trees, to improve the amenity and garden spaces of the properties. These are the proposed plans for plots 1 and 2. They would have a total height of approximately 8 metres. And this is the proposed front elevation for plots 3, with a total ridge height of approximately 7.6 metres. And here we have plots 4 and 5. This building would have a total ridge height of approximately 9 metres. I've also included the first floor plan for these properties, as there's a link between plot 5 and plot 6 at first floor level. You can see it on the plan at the top, and then there's a kind of undercroft where you can walk underneath ground floor level. And these are the proposed elevations for plot 6, which has a total ridge height of 8.9 metres, and the floor plans for plot 6. As you can see, it's a 4-bedroom property with some accommodation in the roof space. These are the photographs from the site. These are taken from the road frontage looking towards Little Park Hatch, which is the Grade 2 listed building. The photograph on the bottom right shows where the proposed access would go through. The part of the wall would be lost. It's not part of the listing, and the Historic Buildings Officer has confirmed he has no objections to the creation of the access. And these are some photographs of the rear of the site. The photograph on the top left is where plot 1 is proposed. It's taken looking towards the public house, and the photograph on the bottom right is looking in towards the site. You can see how it's open at the moment. This slide splits the main determining issues into matters of principle and technical opinion and matters of judgment. With regards to the matters of principle, the planning history and the inspector's decision, which is attached to this report, is a material consideration. With regards to the loss of the public house garden, the inspector was satisfied that the proposal would not prejudice the retention of appropriate community facility. With regards to ecology, the application has been supported by an ecological statement that includes reference to potential impact on bats, and a condition has been included in the recommendation requiring the agreement of an appropriate lighting scheme. Turning to trees, the Council's arboricultural officer has confirmed the development can be completed without harm to significant trees and has suggested a full arboricultural method statement is secured via condition. The only reason for refusal on parking access and highway safety grounds on the previous application related to the parallel parking bays being below the standard length. That's been addressed by the current submission. And turning to the matters of judgment on the right-hand side, with regards to heritage and visual amenity, no objections have been received from the Council's heritage officer. The revised proposal, and officers consider the layout has addressed the concerns that the inspector raised regarding the access. In terms of residential amenity, the site is positioned away from other residential properties and no closer to Yew Tree Cottage than the previous scheme, for which the council raised no objection. The position of the houses in relation to the mature trees has improved and would allow for reasonable garden spaces for the properties. Therefore, for the reasons set out in the officer's report, subject to conditions 1 and 2, and conditions 4 to 19 in the officer's report and condition 3 within the addendum, the planning application is recommended for approval. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Members. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Chairman. I feel as though I've discussed and debated and thought about this application for this particular site on rather a lot of occasions. And very sadly, I really don't feel that I can support this application. I do feel that it's an overdevelopment of the site. It's shoehorning, to my mind, too many properties into what is a relatively small site. One thing I will say is that actually I really do feel that people who've taken over this public house stroke restaurant have very successfully relaunched the property, the business, should I say, and to some respects, I think they're almost a victim of their own success, because I still feel, and I feel that the situation is going to be worse, that the parking facility for the public house restaurant is inadequate. One has to look at the road that it fronts onto. Really, there should not be any vehicles parking on that road. We have Waverley Lane very close by, and I think that already residents in Waverley Lane are beginning to mutter that cars are parking there, that are visiting the park hatch. So I also think that actually parking on site for the new properties is going to be very difficult. Access is difficult, and I'm not sure this is another one of those that actually there are good planning considerations on which to refuse it, but I do feel very unhappy about this. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other? Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Chairman. I found this application the most difficult of today's items, largely because of the challenges of transforming the information presented in 2D format into a 3D visualization on the site. And I guess if you just indulge me a moment, I would like to put to the officers that although we can't ask for 3D visualizations under planning law, if we could encourage our applicants to provide us with something that we could look at in 3D, it might make it an awful lot easier to come to an objective decision about things like this. I suspect, you know, we all went on the site visit and we've all probably come away with different perceptions of what it's actually, how it's actually going to fit in. Anyway, that aside, our decision needs to be strongly influenced by the findings of the inspector on the appeal of the previous applications. Two aspects that we're guided to are the preservation of the mature trees on the western side of the site and the urbanisation of the site through the design of access road and parking provision. The subject of trees seems to have been addressed in the report, so I can't really see any grounds for sustaining that aspect of the objection. My main concern relates to the eastern side of the site, where the houses open onto narrow front gardens which front the access road and then overlook the parking bays, which appear to be backed by a fence with little or no space for shrubs or trees to soften the appearance. The desire to fit in the 6 properties restricts the ability to provide parking on individual plots and forces most of the parking into this parking arrangement on the eastern side. So the gating of the site softens the impact of this distinctly urban arrangement on the listed building. But I do find the proposals pretty unattractive in terms of where we're ending up with houses looking out onto a parking lot. And it rather suggests to me what Councillor Ellis was saying, that this is just a tad overdeveloped. I'm sort of hovering as to where I sit on this one. Be very interested to hear what views other colleagues who went on the site visit have got to offer. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Band.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I, like others, found the site visit very interesting and revealing, but I think to some extent our concerns have been swept away by the inspector's report on the previous application. And looking to the extent to which this application addresses these concerns, I'm left with the only one we don't seem to have covered in the level of detail which I would have liked to have seen, is actually the specific issue of the root protection areas. I know it's alluded to in the condition 13 and the various remarks there, but we haven't actually specifically mentioned root protection areas, and that was one of the few points which the inspector actually specifically picked up for one of his grounds for, refusing last time round. So it seems to me that everything else is pretty well covered, but if we were to, and I'm minded to, agree with the office recommendation, but what I would like to see in condition 13, specific reference made to including root protection areas as part of the items for discussion. I accept it's inferred, but it was a specific comment by the inspector for grounds for refusal, for the lack of clarity in that area. So it does seem to me that should be a matter specifically for our tree experts to have make a decision on if we are going to accept it. But apart from that, it does seem to me it has addressed the issues raised by the inspector. Now, this is not what I think local residents want, but it's the reality of planning, I'm afraid. We are where we are, that the previous application has been judged by an inspector. Some things he's given, acknowledged are okay, including the numbers of dwellings. He's commented on various other things, which this revised application, in my view, has addressed. And so, if that small addition to that condition could be added, I'd be minded to support this application, reluctantly, I must say. But I think with the inspector's report in front of us, I've nowhere else to go.
Okay. Thank you. I was given the impression by the officers that the root protection area had caused the rather awkward layout that we've ended up with here. So you've got the huge great gap between units 3 and 4 was particularly to preserve the roots of that tree behind it. And then you end up with plot 6, which is 40 centimetres from the boundary, which is 16 inches, and that's their rear access. They don't have another rear access because the other side serves plot 5. I mean, it's just odd, I think. And I think, again, plot 6 has been angled to avoid the root protection area. I tend to go along with what some of the other members have said about, I think it's a quart in a pint pot. I think a redesign could end up with a much happier layout on that if they weren't being quite so greedy. If they had 3 pairs instead of the 2 detached units, I think we could probably come up with a better. That's just my opinion. Councillor Dinas.
I agree with a lot what's been said. I think it's overdevelopment, trying to squeeze too many in. I was going to raise the 40 centimetre as, I was astounded when I heard that. especially when I think it's going to be a fence behind, but absolutely astounded. Urbanisation of the site and an awful design. If it's because of the tree roots and everything else, well, it clearly shows that you can't put that many houses in there. So the design, which is so bad, is because they are trying to maximise the numbers. Maybe they need to put less in and design it slightly better so houses don't touch fences. So I'm very unhappy. Thank you.
Councillor Byam.
Thanks, Chairman. Well, I found the site visit both illuminating and horrifying in terms of the condition of the site. I also found the aerial photograph that we had earlier, which we hadn't been shown before. I'd be interested to know what the date of that is. It doesn't appear to match anything that we saw on site, and it would perhaps tell us, if we did know the date of that aerial photograph, presumably taken from Google Maps, how long it's taken for the site to deteriorate to such a large degree with all the debris and junk that are around there, and including, of course, all of the access to that particular site at the time. For the moment, although the gates that we walked through, all the access has been, for vehicles, etc., has actually been through Yew Tree Cottage, and there was a very substantial roadway leading straight down into that, but that was then protected by, now for our site visit, by Harris fencing, and of course all the rear garden, or a large section of the rear garden of Yew Tree Cottage, was used for all sorts of materials, including a container, a 20-foot container, which looked as if it had been there for some substantial period. But notwithstanding all of that, I think development of this site is warranted without Plot 6. Plot 6 is absolutely ridiculous. It looks like a garage tacked onto the end. But no, they say it's a dwelling. Okay, we're comparing it with larger dwellings alongside. I think that and bearing in mind it's 40 centimetres, which we all looked horrified at the layout anyway. If we could actually put a red line across that and take away, I would vote for it. But we can't do that because the planning application we have for us is for 6 dwellings. So I don't think I can support this. It is overdevelopment. The site is a mess. That's not a good reason to give planning permission. Perhaps that was a ploy to make us consider that it's a worthwhile scheme to come. We didn't do a site visit, or did we do a site visit on the previous application? And can anybody tell us? Clearly nobody understood what the mess was behind the facade of a very nice pub.
Thank you. Councillor Goodridge, and then Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, I couldn't do the site visit, so I'm at a slight disadvantage. But looking at the previous reasons for refusal, when it was 6 dwellings, I don't think, unless I've missed it, or it's in disguise, that we ever said it was overdevelopment of the site before. And I just was asking the question, if we now raise this overdevelopment of the site with a different layout, are we on safe ground or not?
My comment to that would be that the area of usable site has been restricted by the root protection areas, and that's why we've ended up with houses 16 inches away from a fence. But perhaps the officers would have a comment on that.
Thank you, Chairman. I think you've made the point that we're looking at a different scheme now. What I would make the point of, the key points of harm with the inspector, and I think it's been sort of highlighted in discussion, was the alignment of the access. It wasn't the provision of 6 dwellings back there, but also it was harm to trees and potential future harm to trees as a result of the siting of some of those dwellings. So in sort of combination, they were the elements of harm. That has been redesigned to accommodate that. In taking that design, we think it's a more informal layout, which was considered more appropriate from our heritage colleagues, or the heritage officer advising us that, so that it sorts more comfortably, and that takes away the heritage harm. So it was very much a combined reason for refusal. So on page 134 of your agenda, you'll see reason 4, which really talked about all those issues that we're discussing here, and where the harm was found was harm to the setting of the heritage asset in terms of the listed building. It wasn't found to be harmful beyond that. So I think we do need to bear in mind that that harm has, we consider, fallen away based on expert advice on heritage grounds, and you need to take into account of whether this can now sit comfortably with it. Obviously, the heritage officers have looked at it from that point, do consider it's okay and acceptable and wouldn't harm, and they strongly defended the reasons for refusal last time, and we were successful at appeal. And just to confirm, they were under delegated powers, so it wouldn't have come before committee, just to pick up on Councillor Byam's points. So we do think that, sorry, the last point I'll just make is just regarding that plot at the bottom there of the screen and the closeness to that boundary. Do accept that it is close to that boundary, but that will sit adjacent to a sort of public open space, sorry, not a public open space, open space in terms of the adjacent school, so it's not going to be hard up against other development, so it wouldn't, if you were viewing it, it wouldn't necessarily appear cramped against other built form of development. There's open space around it. It is limited within the site, but visually and beyond, I don't think it would be harmful in my view. Thank you, Chairman.
You can mow their lawn with a strimmer. Yes, Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Chairman. So I did the site visit. It was jolly useful. To my mind, the site is very awkward. It is cramped. The sizes of the homes, I don't think is very complementary to a new build. Nor did I think that this design complementary to the listed building. I think that's all I need to say. I think most people have said other things. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, are you happy that we move on to the recommendation? The recommendation is that, subject to conditions 1 to 19 as set out on the agenda report, with an amendment to condition 3 as set out on the update sheet, as well as informatives 1 to 9, permission to be granted. Can I have those in favour, please?
It's 3, Chairman.
And against?
That's 6, Chairman.
Abstentions? Okay, that this recommendation is not passed. So can I have a proposal that we refuse this application, and a seconder, please? Proposed by Councillor Ellis, seconded by Councillor Denis. And some outline of some reasons for refusing this application that the officers can then tidy up and put into planning speak. Councillor Denis.
Well, I'll start if it helps. I mean, we've talked about the poor design. Now, it's whether you tie the poor design into overdevelopment, but definitely the design, I think, is very poor, but whether that's contained within an overall condition, refusal, I'm not sure, but I would start off with the design.
Councillor Ellis.
Thank you. I was concerned about design as well, but I do think it's an overdevelopment of the site and, as my colleague said earlier, an urbanisation of the site in a rural area. Thank you.
Thank you. Any others? Officers, would that be sufficient? I mean, cramped appearance, I mean, is that something that we can put in?
If that's what members feel the view is, just based on what was discussing there, Chris and I just put some wording together. We can refine it slightly, but the proposal is cramped and represents an overdevelopment of the site. This is particularly evident with regards to plot 6, which is the bottom plot referred to. The proposal also fails to improve the character and appearance of the area and is harmful. The proposal fails to improve the character of the area and is harmful in terms of its visual impact, contrary to policies D1 and D4 of the local plan, guidance contained within the National Planning Policy Framework, specifically Section 7, which is the design element, and policy TD1 of the emerging local plan. So that was what I'd suggest picking up on the points. And the point I said would clarify as a point Councillor Ellis made about the urbanising impact, so I suggest I would put that in there as the first point.
Thank you. Are you happy with those? Yes. Okay, then members, the revised or the new recommendation is that based on, for those reasons that Peter's just outlined, that permission be refused. All those in favour, please.
6, Chairman.
And against?
No.
Abstentions?
3,
Quiet.
Chairman.
Thank you. So that recommendation to refuse is passed. There are no items to consider in exempt session, so that concludes this evening's meeting. Thank you very much, members. We got through a lot of stuff very quickly there.